How good is Mark Carney so far as acting Prime Minister of Canada? The rise of Mark Carney to the Prime Ministership of Canada in March 2025 represents one of the most significant pivots in Canadian political history. Moving from the halls of central banking to the pinnacle of executive power, Carney, often dubbed the Technocrat in chief, has inherited a nation at crossroads, facing unprecedented trade pressures from the United States and a domestic cost of living crisis. So, how qualified is Mark Carney anyways as Prime Minister? To understand Mark Carney's tenure as Prime Minister, one must first analyze the professional bedrock upon which his glue-grit ideology is built. Carney is perhaps the most academically and professionally decorated individual to ever hold the office. For one, he holds a bachelor's degree from Harvard and a PhD in economics from Oxford. His doctoral thesis focused on the dynamic of competitive advantage, a theme that has become the hallmark of his One Canadian Economy initiative. Carney spent 13 years at Goldman Sachs, gaining a deep understanding of the global capital markets that his supporters argue is essential for navigating the current global trade war. Carney is also the only individual to have governed two different G7 central banks. He led the Bank of Canada from 2008 to 2013 during the Great Recession, where his conditional commitment on interest rates was credited with sparing Canada from the worst of the global collapse. He then led the Bank of England from 2013 to 2020, steering the UK through the initial shocks of Brexit. And before entering politics, he served as the UN Special Envoy on climate action and finance, advocating for the greening of the global financial system, a stance he has since modified to a more industrial, pragmatic approach as Prime Minister. Carney's entry to the Prime Minister's office was not a traditional slow climb through the party ranks. Instead, it was a rapid response to a political vacuum. By late 2024, the government of Justin Trudeau faced a perfect storm of exhaustion. High interest rates, a persistent housing shortage, and sagging polling numbers led to Trudeau's resignation in early 2025. The Liberal Party, staring at potential electoral annihilation by Pierre Poilievre's Conservatives, looked for a serious man to counter the populist surge. Carney entered the Liberal leadership race in January 2025 and won a landslide victory with over 85% of the vote. His slogan, "It's time to build," signaled a departure from the social justice first focus of the previous decade towards a growth first mandate. Despite having never held elected office, a first in Canadian history, Carney was sworn in as Prime Minister on March 14, 2025. He immediately called a snap election to secure a mandate. By leaning into a new brand of Canadian nationalism triggered by aggressive trade rhetoric from the second Trump administration, Carney led the Liberals to a minority government victory, securing his own seat in the riding of Nepean. Carney's first year has been defined by a war-footing economy. His administration is characterized by a shift towards industrial policy and fiscal pragmatism. One of Carney's most aggressive moves was the passage of the One Canadian Economy Act. This legislation aims to 1. Eliminate interprovincial trade barriers, standardizing regulations across provinces to create a truly internal single market. 2. Expedite infrastructure, bypassing traditional bureaucratic hurdles for nation-building projects, specifically in energy and transit. Relations with the US under President Donald Trump have reached a historical nadir. In response to threats of 25% across-the-board tariffs and rhetoric about Canadian annexation, Carney has adopted a policy of strategic autonomy. He has overseen a pivot toward China and the Indo-Pacific, moving away from the total reliance on the American market. Carney also approved 2 major west-east pipelines to transport a burdened natural gas to Europe and Asia, arguing that Canada must be an energy superpower to survive. And, in a move to appease NATO and bolster sovereignty, Carney committed to spending 2% of GDP on defense by 2027, including a 50% increase in troop wages. Carney's economic strategy is a mixture of fiscal restraint and targeted stimulus. For the average family, the results are a mixed bag of relief and structural pain. In a shocking break from his predecessor and his own past as a climate advocate, Carney removed the federal consumer carbon tax. He argued that in a time of hyperinflation and trade war, the tax was an unnecessary anchor on the middle class. He lowered the second income tax bracket from 20.5% to 19%, putting approximately $800 to $1,200 back into the pockets of the average middle-income household. The Carney plan for housing is strictly mathematical. He has formally tied the number of new immigrants to housing availability. This ratio-based immigration policy aims to cool the rental market though critics on the left argue it risks harming Canada's long-term labour needs. Conservative critics, led by Pierre Poilievre, argue that Carney is simply Trudeau with a PhD. They contend that spending remains too high. Despite the tax cuts, the Carney government continues to run significant deficits to fund green industrial projects. Also elitism. They paint Carney as a globalist more concerned with the World Economic Forum in Davos than with the common sense of a plumber in Red Deer. And finally, regulatory relaxation. While the right likes the removal of the carbon tax, they argue his One Canadian Economy Act centralizes too much power in Ottawa, infringing on provincial rights. From the NDP and the progressive wing of the Liberals, the criticism is that Carney has sold the soul of the party to Bay Street. Many climate activists feel betrayed by his removal of the carbon tax and approval of new pipelines. Also, critics argue his approach is too clinical. While Justin Trudeau was criticized for performative politics, some on the left feel Carney lacks the human touch required to lead a diverse nation. They also worry that the massive increase in the military budget will come at the expense of social programs like pharmacare and dental care. Carney's vision is a high-income fortress Canada. He intends to use the next 4 years to 1. Modernize the grid, launching a small modular reactor plan to provide clean, cheap baseload power for manufacturing. 2. Sovereignty, reducing dependence on US supply chains to ensure Canada cannot be bullied by future American administrations. And 3. The 2045 goal, achieving a GDP per capita that rivaling the top 3 nations in the G7 through massive investments in AI and semiconductor manufacturing. If you're a middle-income Canadian worried about the cost of living, here are the 3 specific Carney markers you should probably watch over in the next 12 months. 1. The shrinkflation and price gouging crackdown. Carney has promised to empower the Competition Bureau to cap profit margins on essential goods, so watch if grocery prices actually stabilize or if this is just political theater. 2. Interest rate symmetry. As a former central banker, Carney's relationship with the Bank of Canada is unique. Watch for fiscal monetary coordination. If Carney cuts spending to help the bank lower interest rates faster, your mortgage renewal might become significantly more affordable. And 3. The modular housing rollout. The government has modified the National Building Code to streamline modular home approvals. Look for whether Carney houses, prefab, high-density units actually start breaking ground in your city, or if municipal red tape continues to block them.